Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, welcome everybody. All right, so, okay, great. People in the chat can hear me too. Awesome. All right, so today, finishing off the lectures for week 2, we talked primarily about the paranormal last time, about the paranormal, about parapsychology. We just sort of started to wade into the waters of the paranormal, as it were. Today, we will continue to wade a little further in. I've sort of dropped little breadcrumbs throughout this presentation concerning anomalistic psychology, but also some stuff on the emotions, all toward the end of sort of explaining or getting us all on the same page about what perhaps an encounter with something paranormal or anomalous might be like, since not everyone has had an encounter with such a thing, because after all, the paranormal is supposed to be outside of the realm of scientific explanation or everyday experience, right? So with that in mind, let's share my screen. And we'll get going with the PowerPoint slides. So let me just move this out of the way. And then we will begin the slideshow. So apologies, by the way, everybody, for my very slow computer. It's going to be time for an upgrade soon. Everybody's happy to be here in the morning. That's good. Okay. Anytime now. It'll work. There we go. Okay, so let's get myself out of the way here. Now this lecture, once it starts, here we go. So this lecture, this set of slides is it's based on something that's based on something else. Initially, I had lectures on this in the first few iterations of my course, and then I had a chance to present some of this at the Conference for Inquiry, which is something that the Center for Inquiry Canada does every year. The Center for Inquiry is sort of like a skeptic group, you know, focuses on skepticism, secularism, and so forth. And so one of my former students in this class asked if I would be interested in giving this talk, so I did. And this version of the lecture that I'm going to deliver today is actually based on that talk that I gave. So that's why it might seem a little bit different than a typical lecture from me. But basically what I tried to do in this talk is naturalize the uncanny. This was actually pulled from a chapter in my master's thesis, where I tried to provide a sort of naturalistic account of uncanny events and the sensation that they cause, because I was interested in explaining the uncanny valley phenomenon, which is something I think maybe some of you will have heard of. But today what we're doing is using our naturalized account of the uncanny to try and make a contribution to anomalistic psychology. Now, anomalistic psychology is a bit different than parapsychology. We're going to learn about anomalistic psychology later on in the course, but what I'll say for now is this. Parapsychology, as we learned last time, began in earnest in the 20s and 30s, initiated by Joseph Banks and Louisa Ryan, who were interested in sort of eliminating the excesses of psychical research from the 19th century. Of course, psychical researchers, we're talking the Society for Psychical Research and all of those fellas. So they wanted to use special, unique individuals to understand whether these reported, events like seances, claims of mediumship, spirit photographs were very big back then too, because photography was new as well. They wanted to know whether these might represent actual abilities, which themselves represented a possible future direction for human evolution. The problem is that a lot of fraud happened, as we'll see next week when we look at ESP, mediumship, all that stuff. So there was actually a lot of cases of fraud going on by these so-called special individuals with their special abilities. Parapsychology tried to rein that in by looking at ordinary individuals. Just get a random bunch of people that's supposed to be a representative sample of the population, and we have them do some tests for ESP, perhaps with Zener cards, maybe some tests of psychokinesis by trying to have them influence the outcomes of dice throws, right? These are all things the Rhines did. And the problem for parapsychology was replication and also fraud. There were cases of fraud, of data manipulation as well, which is unfortunate in any scientific endeavor. What anomalistic psychology tries to do is further rein in the excesses of parapsychology. Parapsychology, as we'll see again next week.
A banging.
Oh, sorry, that's some construction. I thought it was far away, but let me close my window. Maybe it's too loud. Is that any better? Let's see. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I had trouble hearing it because I had my headphones in. So what anomalistic psychology tries to do is rein in those other excesses. Parapsychology, although the Rhines tried to turn it into a proper science, as the discipline evolved, it inevitably began appealing to non-naturalistic explanations for the phenomena that were being studied, or at least not, if not non-naturalistic, non-materialistic or non-physicalist. Basically, they began to appeal to processes that might be considered paranormal in the sense that they're just beyond scientific understanding, perhaps supernatural in that they're beyond scientific understanding. Just they're not the kinds of phenomena that science ought to study. Anomalistic psychology tries to apply the limiting principles of naturalism to explain anomalous experiences. So I'll say a bit more about that as the lecture proceeds. When it comes to the uncanny, I'm going to sort of adjudicate between Ernst Jentsch and Sigmund Freud, who were two early 20th century thinkers here who had some things to say about uncanniness and the sensations that it causes. And I'm going to try to show you that despite whatever surface differences you see between them, they both agree fundamentally on the sorts of things that cause uncanny experiences. And these are, as we would say now, perceptions of animacy and mentation. So perceptions of something being alive and something having a mind. And then I try to explain the sense of eeriness that we often experience when we encounter anomalous or uncanny situations or events. It's the characteristic emotion of these sorts of experiences, and I think it is a sort of anxiety where the content of that emotion is uncertainty about animacy and mentation. So hopefully all of this will become a lot more clear as we proceed. I mean, of course, the uncanny is not an easy word to define because we don't really use it too much in our everyday vernacular, do we? I'm curious, actually, why don't we do a little sort of informal poll? I mean, how would you use this word, or have you used this word to refer to anything in just your life? Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've used the word uncanny to describe something like, oh wow, the similarities between that are uncanny. Um,
Yes.
so and that's what I thought that it meant. But then I also knew that it was something that kind of freaked us out, things that look humanoid but like aren't. It's like a nightmare kind of.
Yeah.
Um, so
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we do say often maybe A bears an uncanny resemblance to B or C, right? And that's what the weirdness is that we're referring to when we're talking about, say, the resemblance of a humanoid artifact to a real person. Um, yeah, that's absolutely one of the ways we can use it. Someone else had their hand up. I missed it.
Oh yeah, that was me. No, I
Ah,
was just going off of what Taylor said, talking about how some things can look kind of similar but aren't like humanoid, like the uncanny valley theory, where like things kind of look similar, but there's like an eerie kind of sense behind it.
exactly. Yeah. And that sort of similarity factor is a big part of it. Johnny here in the chat says, I would say the same. I would use Uncanny Valley for things that are familiar yet not. Good. That's good too. Something which is unresolved yet close to being resolved. Yeah, that's pretty good. I would say you're all absolutely right. Other words that we substitute for uncanny or uncanniness are like weird, strange. This is a bit of an old one, but maybe unhomely, because that's actually the another etymological equivalent of the German word unheimlich that Jensch and Freud are talking about. Like the back rooms. Can you elaborate, Andrew? I'm not sure what the back rooms refers to. Is it like a movie or some sort of creepy locale? I'm missing something here. Oh, I'm not. No, okay, I'm not familiar with that, but that's really interesting. Weird rooms that people. Yeah, okay, yeah, that would. Yeah, that sort of. I'm not familiar with this, but it feels familiar. Um, yeah, and yeah, okay, liminal spaces. Liminal spaces also. That's good that Tabitha, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, liminal spaces in fiction can be a little creepy and weird. And that can be a means of invoking the uncanny. Certain beings, certain beings, I mean, not living beings necessarily, but certain beings as in entities that exist, um, can also seem a bit strange. Liminal objects, we call them. They can be a little uncanny. A recently deceased corpse, an effigy, suburbia. Yes. Oh yeah, Megan was a good movie. I thought they used the creepiness there very well in that movie. It was also funny though, so kind of alternated between weird and funny. Good movie though. If you haven't seen Megan, you should. It's a fun time. So yeah, unhomely, eerie, often with kind of weird, perhaps paranormal or supernatural connotations, and certainly with this ring of familiar yet unfamiliar. That's a Freudian thing. Um, what it really means. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Let's see. Well, what I'll say for now is that what the word uncanny really means is sort of like unhomely or unknown. Could also mean sort of like unknown. The German word here, let's get rid of myself here, that, like, as I mentioned, Freud used and Jensch used, which began present day scholarship on this topic is das Unheimlich, which means unhomely. It means that the uncanny thing isn't quite at home in the situation in which we find it. And it's also unhomely in the sense that it ought to be familiar or homely, but it's not. The English word uncanny means kind of the same thing, but etymologically it's a little different. It comes from this old word, ken, which ken is kind of like your knowledge base, your home base of knowledge of stuff you know, right? You may have heard, maybe somebody's told you that you're beyond your ken. That means you're out of your comfort zone, or you're out of your area of expertise, right? What else? Well, sometimes we refer to people who are very clever as canny, and that also reflects that sort of etymology. Yeah, vocabulary. It's always good to do this sort of stuff, you know. Good to know what words mean. And of course, the English ken, it's actually still used, I believe, in Scots. If you go somewhere in Scotland or something where they're still speaking Scots, they'll use the word ken. And it's etymologically connected. It's cognate with German kennst, which again is to know, right? So these words are all sort of distant cousins, if you like. We don't really talk about the uncanny too much in philosophy. Sydney says, some of those TikTok filters that reshape your face. Yeah, that's true. Yep, that's another good example, because you've got that familiar yet unfamiliar sort of feeling at the same time. So that's certainly uncanniness in the Freudian sense. Absolutely. We don't really do this a lot in philosophy. The studies of the uncanny really belong to the humanities. Literature, obviously Gothic literature, some of which I've had you read for this lecture, along with poetry, film studies. It's even appeared in feminism and queer theory, because, I mean, obviously you got to talk about Freud in feminism and queer theory to some extent, right? Even cultural studies, and also architecture. Architecture's, I get, not part of the humanities, but something that we could perhaps apply some of what we're talking about today towards. Of course, there's also robotics and the cognitive sciences. A lot of you mentioned the uncanny valley, and the uncanny valley phenomenon is a sort of strange feeling that people get when they interact with a very, very human-like robot, one that's very human-like, but not perfectly human-like, and it can seem a little weird. That's a good question. I don't think that has to do with the reason. In fact, sure, we may have had to fight other subspecies of humans, like perhaps Neanderthals in our distant past, but we also fought one another, of course. Homo sapiens would fight amongst themselves all the time. And an important thing to remember is that and Neanderthals and humans also actually interbred. We're not quite sure the extent, but we know that it happened because of genetic evidence. So maybe some people might have been creeped out by other kinds of people. Maybe others were not, right? The uncanny valley phenomenon, which many of you mentioned, right, we're probably the most familiar with this as an example of the uncanny, unless you're reading some Gothic literature or, you know, looking at creepy films or something like that. Yeah. Well, yeah, faces are Faces are definitely important here. You can actually read, if any of you are curious about this, there's a former Carleton psychology student, Tyler Burley, who did a master's thesis on the Uncanny Valley. And what they did is they did the morphing study, where we take two images and sort of morph them on a continuum. And one of the interesting experimental conditions that he had in his study was the goat person. It was like a satyr, when they had morphed a goat and a human looking head together at a certain point where the ambiguity was greatest about which category it belonged to, goat or human. That's where people reported feeling the most eerie, right? The highest levels of eeriness. So definitely faces, and we're all perceptual experts when it comes to recognizing faces too, unless we have like prosopagnosia or something, face blindness. So you've all heard of the Uncanny Valley. I had this happen to me. I'm not usually weirded out by robots. I guess just because of exposure, right? I did my master's thesis on the Uncanny Valley as well, although mine was a philosophical investigation, not an empirical one. So I looked at lots of different examples of robots that people thought were creepy, and I was not creeped out by any of them until this one time when I went to a conference. I was in a conference for robotics and philosophy, if you can believe that. And they had a telenoid robot, which you can look this up. I'll put it in the chat. Telenoid. It looks kind of like a doll, just a simple body with a head, and the eyes can follow your eyes. It's got eye tracking. So they had one on display at this conference, and I was just kind of looking at it, and it was just lifeless until like a cursed baby. It is a bit weird. So I hit the button on the little iPad that they had to get it going, and its eyes just kind of did like this. It just kind of turned on and looked at me, and I was like, well, only Uncanny Valley experience I can report, really. But yeah, the face, the eyes, when stuff is off with somebody's gaze, right? Or if something's off with their face, I don't mean like they have like an injury or something. I mean that maybe their emotions, the facial expressions don't match their actual emotions or intentions. That can be a bit weird, right? It does kind of look like a live action Casper. Yeah, if you think that's creepy, let's see. I think this is how it's spelled. If you think that one's weird, you should look at the Geminoid robots. They're the full-on androids. Look if you dare. I'll just say that. Although I met two, when I was at the same conference, I met two people who had these Geminoid robotic copies of themselves. I met Hiroshi Ishiguro and I met Henrik Scharf. And at least when I was dealing with the real life versions of them, they were not creepy. But had I interacted with their robot doubles, perhaps that would have been strange, right? So some of you are okay with the Geminoids and some are like, ugh, so that's interesting as well, because it shows that there is a sort of variety of experiences that comes with this. So that's the other area where you'll hear this discussed. But neither of these really want to understand the psychology of the uncanny in general. So that's what I wanted to do here. I wanted to try and naturalize the uncanny to, well, on the one hand, trying to explain why people react the way they do to these human-like artifacts. And an interesting consequence of that might be that researchers in the humanities would have more to work with as well. But mainly, I think that if we can provide an account of the psychology of the uncanny, that would be a nice contribution to anomalistic psychology. So as I said before, anomalistics has begun to supersede parapsychology. which was founded in the 30s by the Rhines, and which grew out of earlier research, the psychical research and tradition of spiritualism that we learned about last time. Oh, Isaac, interesting. Yeah. So the uncanny valley is like is something that you have to actively try and avoid when you're doing that sort of thing, I would imagine. Something you have to be attentive to, we could say. Would you say, Isaac, that with exposure, say like maybe someone who's never seen a weird digitally rendered face gets freaked out, but for you, do you find that every time the emotion is still really like, oh, it's really weird every time, or is it more like, oh, I need to fix this because someone else might think this is a little uncanny or something like that? So you recognize it, but you don't feel it for yourself. How would you say it works? Interesting. Yeah. And I think we can kind of train ourselves to get used to this sort of thing, but we still recognize it, right? Let's see. So a little bit more about anomalistic psychology. It's, I guess, neutral in its fundamental assumptions than parapsychology is, and that's because parapsychology kind of assumes that there is a paranormal or maybe even a supernatural explanation for the things that it's studying. But according to the initiators of anomalistic psychology, I think it's Leonard Jones and, you know what, I can't remember their first names. We'll just say Jones and Zisny. They say that, quote, anomalistic psychology is concerned with claims that certain psychological phenomena are inexplicable in terms of orthodox science. Now, what parapsychologists are doing are making claims that the phenomena they're studying violate limiting principles of naturalism. Take ESP, for example, the extrasensory motor transfer of information. Well, this violates a limiting principle of naturalism, which is that to transfer information, you need some physical process. And for humans, that process is a sensory motor process. Sensory motor in that we sense, so sensory, and that we act, motor. Motor just means move. So to receive information from you, I have to listen to what you're saying or read what you've written down, right? Something like that. And to communicate with you, I have to do something similar. I have to speak. I have to write something down. I maybe sign. If I communicate with sign language, I'm sending and receiving a different way, but I'm still doing it in a sensory motor way. But ESP, there's a variety of ESP like telepathy, for example, violates this because information is being sent in an extrasensory motor manner, or so it is claimed. So what an anomalistic psychologist is going to try and apply those limiting principles and apply the scientific method and assume these principles, which are very important in science, right? Falsifiability, replicability, parsimony, intersubjective verifiability. Falsifiability, real quick. In science, we don't verify. We attempt to falsify. That's because if we just try and verify, well, it's vulnerable to it's just precarious, right? I use this example all the time, and it's a little shop worn. I forget where it comes from ultimately, probably Bertrand Russell or somebody like that. But let's say I want to know what color all of the swans are, right? So I go down to the river and I count up all the swans. All the swans are white. So I form a hypothesis. All swans are white. Well, I could try and show that to be true by continuing to verify that all swans are white. I'm going to go to a different river look at those swans. What color are they? They're all white too. They all have white plumage. Okay, so yeah, it looks like all swans are white for sure. But all it would take is one swan of a different color, one black swan perhaps, to falsify my claim that all swans are white. So falsification is stronger than verification. So if you can formulate a hypothesis that repeatedly fails to be falsified, that's more certain than trying to gain knowledge or produce knowledge with verification. Replicability is important. Maybe the result I got in my experiment was due to chance, even if my results are statistically significant. So someone else has to do the same experiment. And if they get the same or similar results, okay, that's good. Then we can talk. Parsimony is also known. Oh, let's see. Because of math stuff, eh? We could probably make a truth table out of this, although I don't want to, because it's not a logic class. But yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so if you find something that's not white and not swan, that's evidence for the claim that all swans are white, because you found something that is not a swan but not white. So we're talking interesting. Okay, I don't quite see how this works because I'm not good at math, but I will take your word for it, Conrad. Yeah, it's Isaac. Yeah, it's always easier. Okay, yeah. Like I'm looking, I think that swans are white. Oh, but there's no swans here, but there are purple ducks. So, well, swans are still white, I say, kind of like that, I imagine. I mean, that's not very mathematical the way I've formulated it, but Isaac, you're also correct. It is much easier to find one little exception that falsifies the whole claim. Parsimony is the principle that you may have heard of, referred to as Occam's razor, right? Which usually we say is something like the simplest answer is the correct answer. It's not quite what William of Occam said. William of Occam said something like, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. And here he means, by entities, he means unwarranted assumptions or principles that you're not certain about. Well, that's why, that's a good question, Johnny. So that's why we have to test particular parts of the claim. You'll find that often scientific papers try and break things down as simple as possible, right? So that there's only one or two differences between the experimental conditions. And that's the reason why, to try and zero in on which claim is perhaps false. Yeah, usually we try to, like, there could be complicated claims, but what we try and do is test simple parts of those claims, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So parsimony, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. That means the fewer unwarranted assumptions you have, the better. You can think of, for example, the heliocentric Ptolemaic model of the solar system versus the geocentric model, or no, I've got that backwards. The geocentric model of Ptolemy and the heliocentric model of Copernicus. At the time, both models explained the motions of the planets equally well. Ptolemy had the Earth at the center, Copernicus had the sun at the center, but they both worked equally well. One was simpler, though. You see, Ptolemy had all of these weird crystal spheres and weird celestial processes that really made things more complicated than it needed to be, to have the Earth at the center of the cosmos and explain why the planets and stars move the way they do from our perspective. Copernicus's model just puts the sun in the middle and has the Earth going around it. And that explained the observational data equally well. But even if even if we had never figured out that planets go in ellipses, not circles, and that's why Copernicus's model was not as accurate as it could have been, we still should have gone with Copernicus's model because it had fewer unwarranted assumptions. That is, these invisible crystal spheres that were supposed to explain the retrograde motion of the planets. So that's one example that I like to use. Anomalistic psychology assumes that using these principles, we can explain anomalistic, ostensibly paranormal events and experiences naturalistically, including as non-phenomena, meaning perhaps nothing at all happened, right? If I, for example, believe that I have been abducted by aliens, well, perhaps that's because of sleep paralysis. So there's an alternative explanation, a naturalistic one, and that's what anomalistic psychology would try and go for. But maybe nothing happened. Some people do make up stories, after all. So perhaps sometimes something is going on with a naturalistic explanation, and other times absolutely nothing is going on. And I think that some of these anomalous phenomena, or what others would call paranormal phenomena, can certainly be described as uncanny. They can elicit uncanny experiences. And I think it would be cool if anomalistic psychologists focused in on the uncanny a little bit. I think it would add a lot to their whole explanatory project. Okay, now, what is the uncanny? Jensch, in his paper, The Psychology of the Uncanny, writes that without a doubt, this word appears to express that someone to whom something uncanny happens is not quite at home or at ease in the situation concerned, that the thing is, or at least seems to be, foreign to him. In brief, the word suggests that a lack of orientation is bound up with the uncanniness of a thing or incident. And Freud, in his essay entitled The Uncanny, writes, "The uncanny is that species of the frightening that goes back to what was once well known and had long been familiar." So for Jensch, we can say that uncertainty, unfamiliarity are the key characteristics here. For Freud, it's the fact that you've got something that feels familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Why is it familiar and unfamiliar at the same time? Because of repression and the return of the repressed. I'll say more about that in a moment. So take a closer look at Jensch's paper. He does not really try to define what the uncanny actually is, but he does do a lot of talking about the sort of conditions that must obtain in order for somebody to experience an uncanny sensation. So for those that read Jensch, what kind of objects, situations, stuff like that, what are we talking about here that could elicit an uncanny sensation? Okay, here, let's rephrase. For those that read Jensch, and I hope you did, because it's a good paper. For those that read Jensch, what was your favorite example of uncanniness that he raises in his paper? Nobody, eh? Maybe some of you are typing. Let's see. Nope. Okay, well, I'll go then. Oh, wait. Someone said something. Uh-oh. Did no one read Jensch? Guys, it's a really good paper. It's not even that long. Well, I'll go. I'll tell you. Obviously, it's automatons, automata for me, which are kind of like the predecessors to modern day robots. So I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. But here's some other things that that he thinks cause the uncanny. The uncanny, by the way, all the examples that Jensch uses involve this sort of psychical or intellectual uncertainty. And notice the way Jensch uses psychical in his paper. This is just how the word was used at the time, kind of right around the time of spiritualism, and the Society for Psychical Research. In this context, it just means mental or intellectual, right? It doesn't mean magic powers or anything like that. All the examples Jensch lists involve this mental or intellectual or psychical uncertainty. So, for example, breakdowns in the senses, pharmacological agents, animism, wax figures, effigies, masks, and corpses. So let's go through. Breakdown in the senses. What are we talking about here? Well, imagine going to one of those, imagine you're hanging out with the ghost hunters, perhaps. Sorry, I heard a weird, creepy noise. You're hanging out with the ghost hunters. You go to investigate a ghost sighting, and it's probably in a dark place because they film these things in old buildings at night and so on and so forth. That would be a breakdown in the senses. You're in a dark room. You just can't see as well. You can't navigate your environment as well. You start to become uncertain about what's out there. So classic breakdown of the senses, going into a creepy haunted house. I have not seen Destination Fear, but ghost hunters is funny to me because they're also plumbers. I like how they get out of their plumber van and into their ghost hunting van at the beginning of every episode. So, but yeah, they go to haunted locales, and it's often dark. You can often get a breakdown of the senses when you're in a thing like that. Destination Fear is better. Interesting. I'll have to check it out and critically evaluate it. If you can, we don't verify. How do we verify? If I can fail to falsify that you've killed a ghost. Unsolved Supernatural. I don't know that one either. The only one. Oh, BuzzFeed. Okay. Oh, BuzzFeed Unsolved. Yeah. Okay. I think I've heard of it. The only one I've seen is that one from the 90s, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. I'm not gonna lie, I mostly watch it just because it's good for a bit of a chuckle. And it's hosted by Jonathan Frakes. So yeah, gotta do it. It's funny, Italian plumbers ghost hunt. Well, okay. So look, pharmacological agents, things, if you take certain substances, they're going to have certain effects on your senses, right? Animism, this is a tendency that children certainly have. Oh yeah. Yeah, right. Luigi's Mansion, forgot about that. Animism is a tendency that children have, for example, to treat inanimate objects as if they were alive. Jensch kind of points out that animism is a tendency that is also shared by what he calls, and this is not the preferred nomenclature, obviously, but what he calls primitive peoples. By that, he means what we would today call, indigenous people, hunter-gatherer folk, stuff like that. I don't think that he's trying to make them seem backward or anything by talking about animacy. It's just that it's true that in a lot of indigenous religions and folklore, for example, the world is alive like we are alive, right? Or think of the Shinto religion of Japan, right? Where there are spirits known as kami, that exist all over the place, right? So the world is alive in the same way that I'm alive. Things out in the world have a soul or a mind, and they can do things. They have agency. That's animism. That's what animism is all about. Sinking City, eh? Okay, apologizing to yes, okay. That's similar. I would say that's anthropomorphism. Yeah, so yeah, so animism, in at least when it's a cultural thing, is like the world is alive in the way that I'm alive and you're alive. And if you really want to get a sense of this, I think a really great example is actually some of Hayao Miyazaki's films. You know, his animated films. Anybody seen any Miyazaki films? I'm sure you've heard of them if you haven't seen them. Yes. Okay. Spirited Away is probably my favorite example. It's probably my favorite movie of his. Yeah, Studio Ghibli, exactly. So Spirited Away is a great example of what I'm talking about. So is My Neighbor Totoro, for that matter, although that's really more for kids. It's still a fun movie, though. I like it. So that's animism. And then the human-like artifacts, wax figures, effigies, masks, corpses, etc., can all elicit an uncanny sensation owing to, oh, nice. Yeah, Howl's Moving Castle has kind of a bit of it, but it's based on a book by a Western author, if I'm not mistaken. So, but yeah, it's good. I have not seen The Cat Returns, but I will. But I would say, yes, if you want a demonstration of what I'm talking about, the world is alive in the same way that we are, watch Spirited Away from Studio Ghibli. You'll get the idea. Okay. The main example of something that can elicit an uncanny sensation for Yench are automata, early robots. They can seem very strange when they, quote, appear to be united with certain bodily or mental functions. So has anyone... Yeah. Oh, sorry. So I wonder if anyone besides me has encountered a robot or an automaton. I know that if you're, say, doing digital animation, if you have watched a movie with some bad CGI, you know, you've totally experienced the uncanny. But what about with a wax figure or an effigy or a corpse or a robot? Besides me, because I met that robot in Denmark at that conference. I guess, is it weird? Oh, I see. Oh, so Alicia, I think that was it weird? Because I would think that such a robot would be created to be cute, right? Oh, okay. It talks and has facial expressions. Oh, you had a robotics club? That's awesome. Oh, okay, that's weird. Like it. Okay, yeah, I guess that would be strange. A robot cat server, amazing. The doll and Squid Game. Okay, I see. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, interesting. Oh, right. Oh, so there's a lot of good examples here of automatons and stuff. Yes, it absolutely, Luna. Yeah. Those people that paint themselves silver and stand still. Yeah, some people are kind of creeped out by them for sure. again, because they're, you know that they are alive, but they're standing still like a statue. So that's a bit weird. You're like, what are they going to do? Right. Yeah, iRobot. I actually haven't seen iRobot. Will Smith was creepy. The robot was going to be creepy. So let me get back to this. This is what Yench says about human-like artifacts. He says, for many sensitive souls, a life-size wax or similar figure also has the ability to retain its unpleasantness after the individual has taken a decision as to whether it is animate or not. Here, it is probably a matter of semi-conscious secondary doubts, which are repeatedly and automatically aroused anew when one looks again and perceives the finer details. Or perhaps it is also a mere matter of the lively recollection of the first awkward impression lingering in one's mind. This is where the impression easily produced by the automatic figures belongs, that is so awkward for many people. A doll which closes and opens its eyes by itself, or a small automatic toy, will cause no notable sensation of this kind. While on the other hand, for example, the life-size machines that perform complicated tasks, blow trumpets, dance, and so forth, very easily give one a feeling of unease. The finer the mechanism and the truer to nature the formal reproduction, the more strongly will this special effect make its appearance. Oh, Astro Boy. I remember Astro Boy. Yeah, that was on in syndication when I was really young. Like I mean the old one. But I didn't find it creepy. The Teletubbies, I missed them, but yeah, when I see videos of the Teletubbies, they are very strange. Yeah, I don't remember enough of Astro Boy. Really. It was on early in the morning, and I was too young to really, I think, get into it. Maybe I'm not sure, but okay. So, so why are these things doing what they do, in terms of making people feel this uncanny sensation? The vacuum, yeah. I don't know that one. I'm gonna have to look it up. Yeah, getting stuck with a bunch of trash would be frightening, even if you were a robot. Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, I disagree with that. That is something that's called the mortality, for Tabitha. That's called the mortality salience hypothesis. That's from Carl McDormand, ultimately, at least when it comes to the Uncanny Valley literature. And actually, I do not think that that's why corpses are creepy, or why robots are creepy. Because there is a tacit connection being made there between uncanniness and disgust, and I don't think that connection is actually warranted. I think feeling an uncanny sensation or a sense of eeriness is much different than feeling a sense of disgust. But I'll get to the reasons why I disagree with that idea in a moment. So the affective uncanny, as I call it here, the feeling you feel when you see something uncanny, is a result of psychical uncertainty, according to Yench. We just call that mental uncertainty today. Now, uncertainty might be necessary to experience an uncanny sensation, but it's not sufficient, right? Uncertainty about what, right? This is actually one complaint that Freud levels against Yench in his paper. Freud says, oh, Yench associates the uncanny with mental uncertainty, but why doesn't every situation in which we're uncertain evoke an uncanny response? Haha, gotcha, Yench. But the problem is Freud is kind of making a straw man here. Yench doesn't think it's just simply uncertainty. He thinks it's uncertainty about two very specific things, animacy and mentation, right? So what do we got here? A cog sci class. Oh boy, which one? Which one, Tabitha? Is it the one I'm thinking of? I need to know. But lizard brains is a real thing. Yeah, that's our limbic system. It sounds funny, but it's the part of our brain that evolutionarily speaking, we also share with reptiles. So we call it the lizard brain or the reptile brain, but it's just the limbic system. I wonder if that would have been in Mysteries of the Mind. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. Mysteries of the Mind. Suffice to say, that's an interesting explanation. Yeah, it's a very great class, and people love it. Jim Davies usually teaches it, and he's a very cool dude. A very interesting, he's an interesting guy. Good prof if you can take Mysteries of the Mind. I took AI with him actually back in the day, and I did not finish that class. I actually ended up going with a different instructor. That was not anything against him. That was just the way things were going in my life. I needed to kind of like do things a little differently. But Mysteries of the Mind, I imagine, is fun. Of course, that's a class something like this would come up in, right? But yes, the association between it is an intuitive explanation. I think it's the wrong explanation, and I will tell you why in a moment. So uncertainty for Yench. It's not just uncertainty that causes an uncanny sensation. It is uncertainty about whether or not something is in fact alive or not. In other words, whether it is animate or not. So effigies, wax figures, and dolls might seem a little uncanny, but they don't get up and move. But if they look realistic enough and it looks like they could get up and move, that's pretty creepy. Automata, of course, are the preferred example here because they are like robots. Automata are clockwork mechanisms like robots. Some of them can do really complicated things, and they can look a little bit weird. Obviously, modern robots can be a little uncanny. CGI characters can be quite uncanny, like the Polar Express is the shop-worn example here, right? Very weird, a very weird computer-generated animation. The baby in Twilight. Oh, I can only imagine. I don't know of this Twilight baby. Yeah, I don't know this one, but I guess, yeah, sure. I don't know what's happening in the chat right now, but yeah, creepy CGI babies for sure. Even photographs, especially if it's a photograph of a dead person that you know. Sometimes this illusion happens where the eyes in the photograph appear to follow you. If you walk around the photograph, the eyes will follow you. And it's an optical illusion, but it seems like the person in the photograph is watching you. And that can seem quite creepy because we've got, well, it's uncertainty about all sorts of things, but I say uncertainty about, I'll click this later because my computer's probably too slow to open this. But it could be uncertainty about whether it could hurt you, about what it means for you, what its plans are for you, and that's the mental uncertainty, or uncertainty about the mental state of the uncanny stimulus. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's that, but it could be. And Jensch makes it clear that we can connect this to perceptual animacy or animism, right? Children, for example, have no problem pretending their toys are alive. But when we grow out of it, And we start to see, and we still see that sort of creeping back in of this animism that we think we've grown out of, for example. That might be a bit unnerving. That's probably more of a Freudian explanation, though. So just to recap, where are we right now? We're at about 12:36, so about an hour in. Now, Freud, we'll get to Freud in a moment, but just to recap Jentsch, we've got Ernst Jentsch, who says, okay, things are uncanny because they cause us mental uncertainty in particular about whether it's alive or not, whether it has a mind or not, and what, if it has a mind, what it wants with us, right? So, yeah, I wouldn't know. I do not babysit, but I guess it could be weird. Yeah, that's true. That's true. A lot of these things are artificial, of course. Although there are some uncanny things, uncanny examples that Jentsch offers of natural things. He tells us of imagine you're a traveler and you're walking through the forest and you sit down on what you think is a log, and then the log starts moving. And then you realize it's not a log at all, but a giant snake that you've been sitting on. That is something that Jentsch would say is an example of an uncanny sensation from the natural world. Not elicited by anything artificial. Yeah, that's weird. But children don't have those social skills yet, though, so they don't realize if they say that it's weird, right? So to recap Jentsch, let's see, where are we slide number wise? Okay, we're about halfway through. To recap Jentsch, yeah. These are good points. Okay, so let me just recap Jentsch and I'll come back to the chat. Jentsch, the important thing is uncertainty about animacy and mentation, and that's why automata are his biggest example of things that elicit this sort of psychical uncertainty, because they look and move as if they are living beings, but they are, of course, artifice. They're artificial. They behave intentionally as if they have a mind, but we know it's just a clockwork mechanism. And this sort of uncertainty, is it alive or is it inanimate? Is it a machine? Is it a human? Is it a mindless automaton, or does it have a mind or a soul? This tension for Jentsch is what explains the uncanniness we feel when we see or encounter something like this. Okay, back to the chat. Yeah, well, there are both. So yeah, a stick insect. Yeah, yeah, I call them stick insects, and there are leaf insects too. And then there are those praying mantises that look like flowers, and there's all kinds of camouflage. Yeah, these can be a little weird when you realize that they are alive and not a stick or a flower or something. There's that sort of moment of uncertainty. Say you think you're looking at a stick and then it moves. There's that moment of uncertainty before you realize it's a stick insect, where you might feel a little weird, right? Because you're not sure what you're looking at. Jentsch would say that's definitely the uncanny. Yes, I think that I believe this, Tabitha, that the uncanniness can be resolved with further understanding, right? As you say. But yeah, well, these are all parasitic examples. Those are just kind of creepy. Yeah, the ocean. Yeah, I guess so. There's a lot of dark things under there. It's a creepy place. Yeah, I had when I did I was trying to decide what to do the cryptozoology lecture on the last time I did this class, and one of my students said, let's do anything about the ocean because it's terrifying. You know, I said, yes, you're right. It is kind of terrifying. So let's see. We're getting about halfway through the slides. Why don't we take a break? Does anyone want to take a break? Okay. Sure. Yeah, let's do 10 minutes. So it's 12:42. So let's resume at 12:52, and we probably won't go the full 3 hours today. I will probably run out of material a little bit before then, but that's fine. So yeah, let's pause for now and pick it up again at 12:42. And yes, that is what we will do. I mean, if we finish the material early, we'll just chit chat if you guys want about uncanny stuff. Okay, I will be back shortly, everyone. Okay, we're all slowly filtering back in. I'm a minute late for my break, but I'm sure the smokers and coffee drinkers don't mind. Some of what you were saying about the ocean reminded me of something just now in the chat. I was doing virtual reality at the Ottawa International Animation Festival last fall, because some of the creators, the directors, they create films, animated films that are meant to be experienced in VR rather than on a screen. And one of these films was a sort of descent to the bottom of the ocean. And you go down, oh gosh, I wish I could remember what it was called. Maybe it'll come back to me. Lumina, something with light. Something with light. Okay, you know what, guys? I'm just going to Google it because now it's bugging me. And if any of you have VR, maybe you have like a PlayStation VR, or you have the VR with, you know, you use your phone as VR like this. What? Oh, sorry. Did I take all the coffee? What was it called? Ah, it's bugging me. I need to know. (2022) lineup. We're gonna get to the bottom of this, because if you can see it, you should. Yeah. Evil Josh takes too much coffee. Here's the schedule. Okay. I know this. I know this is not like super relevant. It's just, if you have the chance to see some of these, they're pretty neat, actually. You think I'd remember these things? Biolume. Biolume is what it was called. I will spell that out. Yeah, the director was pretty neat. He was chill. His and this other guy's that was called From the Town Square were they were like the only two that were working for most of the festival. We just couldn't get the other things up and running, which was really disappointing. But Biolume was fantastic. And the other one, yep, it's on Steam, so you can check it out. And basically, you just kind of descend to the bottom of the ocean where there's all this bioluminescent life, and you end up getting eaten by some kind of giant ocean baby or something. It's pretty far out. It's pretty far out. But the other one, From the Town Square, also good. Also really cool guy who directed that project. It was neat chatting with him. Kind of neat to be in a different world for a little bit. You know, you're a scientist, you're a philosopher, and then you go and work at a film festival. If you ever have the chance to do this, you absolutely should. It's really cool. So yeah, perhaps Biolume would seem a little uncanny if you are nervous about the ocean. I don't know. Give it a watch. Yeah. So talking about Freud, for Freud, things become uncanny because they are repressed and they return from repression. Okay. Sorry, I'm bugging my partner. So when they return from repression, then they can seem quite uncanny indeed. So we need to talk about Freudian psychoanalysis here a little bit. Before we do that, though, we can we can talk a little bit about the Sandman. So real quick, I know some of you didn't have the chance to read Yench, but what about Hoffman? Did anyone read Hoffman? I hope some of you read Hoffman because it's creepy. It's a good creepy story. Okay, good. Jack did. Awesome. Tabitha did. Conrad, it's all right. Don't worry about it. But you should read it because it's just awesome. I get it. It's been a crazy week. But do go back and read it. I mean, it's just a good bit of literature that everybody should be familiar with. It's like classic Gothic literature. And I'm not even a literature nerd. But I like this story. Well, I guess I better summarize it. So, spoiler alert. It's got a character who is revealed to be an automaton, which Yench thinks is a bit weird. But Yench gestures toward Hoffman's work as examples of uncanniness, beyond just automatons and stuff like that. Hoffman, all of Hoffman's stories are kind of weird and creepy, right? It's just that in this case, it's particularly interesting because we have an automaton in the story, Olympia. So anyway, I'll summarize it. So the Sandman actually begins as a series of letters. Nathaniel, who's the main character, is writing his brother Lothar, or his brother-in-law, his soon-to-be brother-in-law Lothar, about his childhood terrors. So it's the brother. So Lothar is the brother of Clara, his fiance, Nathaniel's fiance. And so he's writing like, "Oh man, I'm so nervous about everything coming up. Got the wedding, all this stuff. And also I'm really been thinking about the Sandman a lot lately. The Sandman, he comes from the moon, and if you don't go to bed on time, he throws hot coals into your eyes, and your eyes jump out of your head, and then he takes them back to his nest on the moon and feeds them to his children." This is the story that Nathaniel's nanny tells him of the Sandman, right? And he's been preoccupied with this because he thinks that, first of all, the Sandman is Coppelius, this really creepy dude who shows up and conducts arcane experiments with his father and eventually ends up killing his father, Nathaniel's father. He thinks that this Coppelius might be the Sandman, and that this other guy, Coppola, at this university in Italy where Nathaniel is studying, might also be the Sandman. Coppelia might be Coppola, or Coppelius might be Coppola, and they both might be the Sandman. And Nathaniel's really weirded out by all of this, right? Right? Yeah, it's kind of gets the idea of the doppelganger or the double goer, which Freud also thinks is an uncanny idea as well. So Nathaniel, when he's a kid, thinks that Coppelius is the Sandman, and his fears are somewhat confirmed when he stays up late one night watching Coppelius and his father working on these weird alchemical arcane experiments. And Coppelius catches Nathaniel and lifts him up by the fire and threatens to throw hot coals in his face. Sometime later, Nathaniel's father is killed in an explosion in the lab, and Coppelius skips town. Then years later, Nathaniel goes to university. Yeah. Well, they're not. Yeah. Twins. Twins. Yeah. Twins maybe could be a little uncanny for the same reason that the doppelganger could be uncanny. Yeah. I was trying to think of this in my other class, but I finally remembered there's a really neat horror film that messes with the idea of the double, but also with questions related to selfhood and personal identity. It's called Infinity Pool. I think it was directed by David Cronenberg's son. It's really awesome. Oh yeah, Us. Yes. Us is also kind of like, yeah. because that's the one where, yeah, that's the one where all the doubles live underground and stuff, right? Yeah. Yeah, Us was really creepy. Jordan Peele, man, like there, if there's one horror director who's doing like the creepy, eerie, uncanny stuff really well right now, I think it's Jordan Peele. You know, a lot of other stuff is jump scares or it's blood and guts, and Jordan Peele's really good at making you feel weirded out or creeped out because of the uncertainty factor. And that is another example of uncanniness, right? Like Nope, you know, oh, it's an alien spaceship. That's what I thought. No, it's alive. It's a life form, right? Very cool. Yeah, Nope is dope. I really like Us. Obviously, Get Out. Because then again, you have like people being put inside your mind. Like he's just like a wizard at this stuff. It's awesome. Just awesome. Yeah. Yeah, where you think there's aliens there. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Nope is, yeah, man. The Jordan Peele, just awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Um where was I? Oh, right. So he goes to university under this Professor Spallanzini, and he meets this lens salesman, Coppola. He's got eyes aplenty. Eyes aplenty. What does he mean? Well, he's not trying to take Nathaniel's eyes like Nathaniel thought. No, he's a lens salesman. So he's got spy glasses and telescopes and magnifying glasses and reading glasses and all kinds of things. And that's what gets Nathaniel thinking that Coppola might, in fact, be Coppelius. One day, back to the chat real quick. Yes, Coraline. Yeah, I've actually had a couple of essays in previous iterations of this class written on Coraline by Neil Gaiman, the book and the film. And yeah, hell, Neil Gaiman's another one. Like, I feel like Neil Gaiman just exists in this in some kind of dream madness all the time. You know what I mean? Like, it's like he lives there. I don't know the story of how it got published, but oh, okay. Kind of like The Hobbit, only in reverse. Yeah. Yeah, The Hobbit got, yeah, that's how The Hobbit got published. Publisher gave it to his kid or something and said, if you like this, I'll publish this book. And he liked it, so the book got published. I guess in this case, the book scared the crap out of this kid, and well, good, it's scary enough so we can get it published. Oh, okay, yeah, wow, that's interesting. So an interesting parallel. That's pretty cool. Neil Gaiman, though, is another one. If you guys ever have a chance to read the Sandman series, completely different Sandman than the one we're talking about here, but his graphic novel series Sandman is seriously some of the most imaginative fantasy writing I think you'll ever encounter. And it's a Netflix show now. I think they're filming the second season. I think they're working on the second season. Anyway, the Netflix adaptation is pretty faithful to the comics. It's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. The graphic novel is amazing. It's epic storytelling. It really is. And if the show keeps going, I think it's going to do a really good job of adapting the story. But yeah, Neil Gaiman, Jordan Peele, these imaginations these people have. It's amazing, you know. And Hoffman too. So Hoffman, let's continue with Hoffman. So one day, Nathaniel sees Professor Spallanzini's daughter Olympia with the spyglass that he got from Coppola, and he falls in love with Olympia, forgets completely about Clara. And there's even this one moment in the story where they're at a dance, and oh, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I've heard of that audio drama. Yeah. so there's this dance, and Olympia, it's kind of like, remember, none of us were there, but back in the day, you know, wealthy people, fancy people, they would have a coming out, which is not like coming out of the closet the way we say coming out today. It's coming out like, okay, here's my son or daughter, usually daughter, they're an adult now, let's dance. All of the suitors come, and it's very posh and fancy, and her pinkies up in the air like this, you know. So that's kind of what's going on here for Olympia. Olympia is coming out. The professor says, "This is my daughter Olympia. Let's see what everybody thinks of Olympia." And of course, Nathaniel's smitten with her and dances with her. Her dances are described as sort of mechanical. Olympia doesn't really engage in conversation. She just kind of goes, kind of like automatically responding to what people are saying. She plays the piano, but she plays it too perfectly, you know, like a machine. And Nathaniel's in love with her, but everyone else is like, this guy Nathaniel's in love with a robot. You know, everyone's like, what the hell? This is so weird. What is up with that guy? Oh, I didn't know it was a podcast. I know there's a show, there's a television adaptation of it with Jessica Biel, I think. I watched the first episode. I need to get back on that, I think. Yeah, based on the, okay, so that was based on the podcast. Interesting. I have to check that out for sure. So Nathaniel's in love with Olympia now, who he does not know just yet is a machine, an automaton. Yeah, podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts on road trips with, like if my partner and I go on a road trip, usually we throw on a podcast series. So I keep that in mind for our next road trip. If I'm not in a car, I get bored of podcasts. It's weird. It's got to be, if I'm not in a car, I got to listen to music. If I'm in the car, podcast. So Nathaniel's in love with Olympia, forgets about Clara. One day he hears a fight going on in the professor's room, and Nathaniel goes to see what's up, and it's Professor Spallanzini and Coppola fighting over Olympia's body. He sees in this moment that Olympia is a machine, because Coppola, who is at this moment revealed to be Coppelius, because he made the eyes. That's what Coppelius and Nathaniel's father were working on, the eyes for Olympia, the automaton. Coppelius / Coppola runs out of the room with Olympia's lifeless body, and her eyes are there on the floor. And Nathaniel just loses his mind and starts beating the professor like crazy, right? Sometime later, he returns home, and you think that Nathaniel's somewhat recovered. He's back with Clara. That's good. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I like Batman. Batman's probably the most uncanny superhero, if you think about it. He's very goth. Very goth. I mean, Gotham, you know, it's right there. Like, so Nathaniel's back home with Clara. We think he's doing better. We think he's gonna marry Clara. He's forgotten about Olympia. He's like, I'm not in love with that machine anymore. So they go up to a tower to get a view of the vista in the town. Nathaniel still got his spyglass from Coppola. He pulls it out and he sees a figure in the distance coming closer. We don't know what it is at first, but it drives Nathaniel mad. And he attempts to throw Clara off of the tower. Luckily, Lothar, Clara's brother, is there and is able to save Clara. But Nathaniel, he's going crazy by himself up there, going spin round, wheel of fire, talking nonsense. Coppelius finally arrives at the bottom of the tower. People are looking up. Oh, someone get him down from there. He's going to hurt himself. Coppelius says, don't worry. He'll come down on his own soon enough. And Nathaniel throws himself off the tower to his death. Coppelius disappears into the crowd, and Clara went on to live a quiet life with a different husband, had some kids, and was able to put all of this behind her. And that is basically the summary of the Sandman. Yeah, tries to throw her off a roof. So there's a lot of commentary here. A lot of social commentary, really. I mean, Olympia, the automaton, who's just a sort of pretty thing, who sits at the party looking pretty, making casual conversation, versus Clara, who's an actual person with actual thoughts in her head. There's quite a bit of social commentary going on here about how women were regarded in society at that time. And there's also a lot of uncertainty. And this is why both Jensch and Freud point toward Hoffman as this sort of master of the uncanny, right? Sydney, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it speaks a lot to today as well, because women have been held to this like really high standard of looking almost fake. And it's because in a lot of the times they are with I forget what, Facetune and all of that, like none of it is real. And then women in real life are considered like less attractive because they don't look like they do on Instagram.
Yeah, it's that social media effect, really. Like now there's a filter for everything, and before the age of filters, it was Photoshop, right? Exactly what you're saying, but with perhaps people on the covers of magazines rather than Instagram reels and things like that, right? So it's absolutely still with us, unfortunately. And yeah, you're right. I think that this can be applied in the present just as much as it could have in the 19th century. Follow up, Sydney?
Yeah, I would say like absolutely with the Photoshop, that's like the origin. And I remember all those commercials from like Dove when they started doing the like, this is what real women look like, blah, blah, blah. But I would say like now with the social media and how accessible that technology is, it's all like almost every woman is expected. Like once upon a time, it was like, oh, just the models look that way. But now half the girls in your class look like that on social media. And I think it warps everyone's perception.
Yeah. And personally, I also find it a little, it's not uncanny in a creepy way, but it is kind of uncanny in the sense that if the technology itself is uncanny to me, if that makes sense. It's not like if I see a person on social media who's used a filter and then I see them in real life, I do not get the uncanny feeling. What gives me the uncanny feeling is that everybody's doing this, and it's just like, this is just what we do,
Yeah, I'd say like the beauty standard has become uncanny.
Yeah, and the whole fact that this has all happened is weird to me, right? Because I actually don't spend a whole lot of time on social media, so it's yeah, it's strange. It's strange, for sure. And the creepiness, the uncertainty in the story too. Just to circle back to that, is the main takeaway, though. I mean, certainly there are all kinds of ways you can read this, but for our purposes, think about the uncertainty here. The uncertainty of the identity of the Sandman. Is Coppelius the Sandman? Is Coppola Coppelius? We're kind of left uncertain about this until points of the story when it's eventually revealed. But up until then, we're kind of like, how strange. Imagine reading this in the dark in a candlelit room at night, and you conjure up an imaginative scenario as you read the story. You're picturing it in your mind. That's what I like to do when I read the story, and it always kind of gives me the ooh, like, oh, this is kind of weird, kind of creepy. I like it. And the uncertainty about Olympia too. Just what's Olympia's deal? Is she a human or a machine? Eventually, she's revealed to be a machine. Now, Freud, I think, makes a fundamental mistake here. He absolutely mischaracterizes what Jensch is actually talking about when he gestures at Hoffman and his works. Jensch thinks that it's the mental uncertainty that Hoffman evokes in the reader. That is the reason why his stories are so uncanny, so creepy and eerie. Freud thinks that Jensch is pointing at Olympia, the automaton, as an example of uncanniness, as the main source of uncanniness in that story. And I think Freud is actually, again, mischaracterizing what Jensch is saying here. Jensch is not saying this story is creepy because there's an automaton in it. He's saying it's creepy because we're uncertain about who these people are. That's why the story makes us feel eerie. But nonetheless, Freud continues on in his Freudian way, as he does. He says that Olympia is not uncanny. It's the Sandman himself. Remember, the Sandman is revealed to be Coppelius and Coppola. We're uncertain about his identity, but his main thing is he's all about eyes, right? Nathaniel hears the story of the Sandman from his nanny, who says, well, the Sandman will come and take your eyes if you don't go to bed. So get off to bed, Nathaniel, or else your eyes will be gone, fed to his children on the moon with their hooked beaks. Coppelius threatens to pour hot coals in Nathaniel's eyes when he catches him spying on him and his father. Coppola, eyes aplenty. I have eyes aplenty. Just pulling all these lenses out of his pockets. Really weird, kind of weird, right? It's all about the eyes. What's this thing about the eyes? Freud says. Freud says this is, and I am absolutely 100% serious, castration anxiety. It's the return of the repressed, a repressed fear, a fear of losing your sexual power. That is how Freud understands this. So castration anxiety or castration angst. Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot to unpack here. Yeah, thanks, Freud. I know Freud, it's all about sex with Freud. But you know why? He's writing in the sort of, end of the Victorian, beginning of the Edwardian period in Europe, where everybody was kind of very sexually stifled. So it kind of makes sense that Freud would emerge in a sort of culture like that. So how is this supposed to work? Well, this is a psychoanalytic explanation, right? And we need to add a little bit. We need to add a little bit here. Ruled by his id. Yeah. Tabitha says something here. Okay, so I would also argue that there's uncertainty with the love interest. Yeah, okay, good point. Yeah. So Nathaniel has this deeply ingrained lack of trust and uncertainty from his childhood trauma. And then, of course, there's everything that happens with Olympia. But before he even met Olympia, he referred to Clara as an automaton during their argument. Ah, good point. Good point. I forgot about that. Because she has a tendency to be more clinical, logical, dismissive of the issues he's having and the way he's expressing himself. That's interesting because we have the automaton Olympia, who's too perfect, and the Clara acting like as an automaton because she's being the logical one and Nathaniel is being the emotional one, which is kind of a role reversal, kind of a gender role reversal, especially if you're talking early 19th century. So that's really, real nice work catching that one. That's great. Tabitha also says, I interpreted the ending as him seeing something in Clara through Coppola's lens that severed his trust and was kind of like the last straw, whether it was something real or not. Sandman, Coppelius, Coppola is a kind of contagion of uncertainty, uncanny that way, if that makes sense. I think it does make sense. Yeah. No, that's perfect. That's awesome. This, by the way, is the kind of thing you want to do in your critical responses. If you have reflections and comments like this that you want to introduce and defend, this is the kind of thing you want to do. So great work, Tabitha. Maybe you'll want to write a reading response on this. keep it in mind. But yeah, excellent job pointing that out. So this is how Freud understands it. Freud is a psychoanalyst, right? Which means that he's looking for disorders of the soul or psyche, not the brain. Freud was actually trained as a neurologist, as a physician who specializes in the brain. But he developed psychoanalysis because he would often encounter patients who were mentally ill, but which didn't have anything wrong with their brains, no head injuries or anything like that. So that's how psychoanalysis began to be developed. Well, Freud's weird, but he's not really like the freak that people make him out to be. So psychoanalysis says that anxieties, neuroses, mental disorders are the result of a psyche that is not fully integrated. If a traumatic event happens to you, say, or if you have some kind of fear, Freud would say that what your mind does to try to cope with that typically is repress it, to try and push it down into the unconscious mind, right? But inevitably, those fears will reemerge symbolically in dreams or as neuroses or phobias or any number of things. So that's why we do psychoanalysis. It's a sort of stream of consciousness talking about your thoughts and feelings to try and bring these things out of repression, shine a light on them, and integrate them into the psyche. That's the idea, which is not really that crazy. Where it gets crazy is how some of these things get symbolized when they are repressed for Freud, right? And there are problems with psychoanalysis, right? It's not really very scientific. We can't really test a lot of its claims. How should we understood the whole I thing here? Freud says it's repressed, it's castration anxiety, and this really comes from not medical science or psychology. It comes from mythology. The Oedipus, the myth, the story of Oedipus the king, right? Symbolically, at the end of the play, first of all, who's read Oedipus the king? Oedipus Tyrannus, or Oedipus Rex is sometimes translated as sometimes titled Oedipus Rex, but in Greek it's Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus the king. All right. Okay. Stephen Fry reading Oedipus on audiobook. That would be pretty cool. Well, I guess I'll tell you the story. So Oedipus is the king of Thebes. He's the king because he solved the riddle of the Sphinx. But now there's this miasma, this corruption affecting Thebes. Crops are dying, people are sick. A miasma is like a pandemic, but for everything. Everything is just corrupted and breaks down. So Oedipus wants to know what's up. So he talks to Tiresias, the seer. And Tiresias is blind, but he is the seer. He sees. He can talk to the gods and stuff, right? So he's blind, but he sees. Oedipus has eyes. He does not see, because Oedipus is the cause of the problem. So that's what Tiresias says. And they try to convince Oedipus, Oedipus, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. Just leave. Just go. Get out of here. You don't want to know. Don't stop asking questions, Oedipus. But Oedipus needs to know. So he tells his wife, Jocasta, I've got to get to the bottom of this. And he does. It turns out that Oedipus was left out to die when he was a baby. This was called exposure. A lot of ancient societies practiced this. But he didn't die. He was rescued. His adoptive father named him Oedipus, the swollen-footed one, because he was chained to a rock by his foot. Oedipus grows up and kills a man on a crossroads one day, riding in a chariot. He just kills him. Turns out this was his father, who had abandoned him out in the wilderness all those years ago. takes that chariot, goes home, and marries this guy's wife, Jocasta, who, unbeknownst to Oedipus, is Oedipus's actual mom. Once he finds this out, well, he tells Jocasta, right? She kills herself. Right? Well, that's exactly what it's about for Freud. It's a literal power move. It's all about power for Freud. Now, Oedipus, so Jocasta kills herself. And when Oedipus finds her body hanging there, he takes the brooches from her dress, from her robes, and gouges his own eyes out, now that he knows the truth. And this symbolically stands in for castration, because the punishment for incest in ancient Greece, in many of the city-states, was castration. So it's a symbolic thing that Freud sees in this play, right? And by the way, Freud is great if you want to learn, if you want to understand myth, literature, movies. Go to town with Freud. It really works. It's great. You should all watch. It's a film by Slavoj Žižek called The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, and it's just Freudian psychoanalysis applied to classic films. And it's great. It's really great. Yeah, it's not really that. Yeah, a lot of people in a lot of modern day psychologists, frankly, misrepresent the Oedipus complex. They say, oh, Freud thought everyone wanted to have sex with their mom or something. No, that's not what Freud thought. Freud thought that everyone has an unconscious desire to either, an unconscious desire to take. Oh God, what the fuck? It's my doorbell. Freud thought that everyone has an unconscious desire to usurp the power of their father and a fear of losing that power. And again, that goes back to, you can see that in ancient Greek myth where, right, Cronus, Zeus's father, kills his father, Uranus, and castrates him. And then Zeus has got to kill Cronus and castrate him and take his power. That's what it's really about. It's unconscious, right? It's not like you want to, scoodly poop with your mom or something. So, yeah, a lot of people get it wrong. And, sure, Freud, psychoanalysis, not scientific, but don't make a straw man out of Freud, which is what many people do, right? Yeah, I got that from Crash Course World History with John Green, scoodly pooping. The parent killing destinies, yeah. Yeah, right? A little overkill. But it's the Greek gods. They're just supposed to be bigger, more powerful, more effed up versions of us, right? It's not like the Abrahamic God who's like, oh, he's perfect. He's all knowing, all loving, all powerful. No, Zeus, total jerk. Yeah, like exactly. They're just extra versions of people, big, giant, really extra people. And Zeus is going around with his lightning bolts. Zeus is always raping people. I mean, he's either killing, I'm sorry, like trigger warning, but Zeus is not really big on consent. He's not really big on letting his enemies live. Not really a very nice guy, to be honest. But as Machiavelli said, 'tis better to be feared than to be loved, perhaps, if you're supposed to be the king of the gods, right? All right, what's happening in the chat? Well, they're not really about truth in like, they don't try to paint a picture of how the world literally is, but Greek myths try to say something true about the human condition using a fictional narrative, right? Yeah. Yeah, cancel Zeus. Pretty much. Yeah, the Greeks, by the time we get, even by the time we get to like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in what we call the classical period, it's not like the ancient Greeks believed this stuff literally anymore. They didn't. The Greeks were pretty rational people, culturally speaking. They really valued reason, and they had their myths. But by the time we get to where we're actually reading ancient Greek philosophy, or even before with the pre-Socratics who were trying to study nature instead of mythos, yeah, the Greeks did not literally believe these stories. They hadn't for a long time. But they still thought that they were like good for learning stuff. Yeah, God of War games. They're pretty neat. I've only played the newer one, the one on the PS4. Where Kratos is hanging out with the Norse gods, and they're all crazy too. Probably crazier than the Greek gods. The Odin, who was the leader of the Norse pantheon, his name means the mad one because he's crazy and kind of paranoid, right? So, okay, no spoilers. Haven't played Ragnarok yet. Okay, so Freud thinks that, okay, this is uncanny because it's all about Nathaniel's eyes, and the eyes stand in for the genitals. So it's castration anxiety. Nathaniel has castration anxiety, and we all have castration anxiety. So when we read this story, we get creeped out because it's a repressed fear. But it's unfamiliar because it's repressed, but it's familiar because it's right there in the story, and that's why it seems uncanny, right? But I mean, obviously there are good evolutionary reasons to fear damaging the eyes. I mean, it's actually a reflex that if something gets too close to your eyes just automatically close, because we are human beings and our dominant sense is sight. So it just makes sense that we would have evolved reflexive mechanisms to guard the eyes, right? Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that in the trailers. He's not some big giant hyper masculine dude. He's not what you'd expect. He's just a guy. And if the game parallels what I know about the myths, he's a guy who's obsessed with preventing Ragnarok, with preventing his death at the end of the world. I think that they do that in the game too. Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty much Odin from mythology. By the way, I am not a mythologist. If you guys want to know about Norse myth, though, then you want to probably watch this guy's YouTube channel. I'm typing it out here. Normally, I don't recommend YouTube channels for learning things. But if you go to this guy's YouTube channel, he is a PhD in Old Norse studies, reads, writes, translates Old Norse stuff, and does it very well, presents it very well. So if you want to know about that, that's where you want to start, I think. I think in fact he's now teaching exclusively on YouTube and Patreon because, and this is sad but true, he makes more money doing that than working at a university. It's a sad state of affairs, but it's true. Yeah. Yeah, and for Greek and Roman stuff, it's easier to get that in a university course, in a university program for sure. But there's also some good stuff. You have to be very careful when you're trying to find educational content on YouTube. Some of it is really, really well done, and some of it is absolutely terrible and will lead you down a rabbit hole to a bunch of nonsense. So you have to be careful. So whenever I recommend a pedagogical YouTube channel, I make sure that I've vetted the channel very carefully. Okay, I'll check that out because I like math. I mean, I don't like math, but I want to like math. Oh, Masters in Folklore, neat. Yeah, I think you'll like Dr. Crawford's channel. And he's networked with a bunch of like he does stuff with there's an old English guy, and he hangs out with paleontologists all the time talking about dinosaurs. So, and he's always out in the wilderness with a cowboy hat, he's just kind of a character. So check it out. You'll like it. Okay, so Freud says this is why this is uncanny. I don't think Hoffman's Sandman is uncanny. Not the character. It's horrifying. It's frightening. I'm going to take your eyes, right? It's quite scary. Is that uncanny, though? I don't think so. I think the uncanny, Freud thought the uncanny was a species of frightening, and it is in a sense, but it's not frightening the way that, to me, the Sandman or Coppelius is. It's a different kind of fright that we're dealing with here. I think, following Jensch, that it's actually the reader's uncertainty about perhaps the true nature of Coppelius / the Sandman. That's what's really weirding us out. But Freud does discuss a number of other examples of uncanniness. The doppelganger, for example, the double goer. It's pretty creepy. Déjà vu, instances of déjà vu, which means already seen in French, because that's repetition. Notice these all have to do with repetition. Things returning from, repetition is creepy for Freud. So the doppelganger, that's like, there's two of you, a sort of repetition. Déjà vu, you've already seen it, repetition. Strange coincidences. Yeah, déjà vu is weird. Maybe we can do a lecture on déjà vu in this class. That might be fun. Strange coincidences. There's one coincidence that ties into this idea, the omnipotence of thoughts, or what psychologists today would call magical thinking. Here we have in Freud's essay a tale of a patient of his who was staying at a sanitarium, I believe, like a health resort up in the mountains. And this patient had a little crush on one of the nurses that was there. And he always stayed in the room that was adjacent to hers, because I guess he liked being close to this nurse that he had caught feelings for. So he goes to stay at the retreat, wants his usual room, but it's been taken by another patient. And he says, "Curse that man dead." And 2 weeks later, this guy that he cursed dies. And so this was a patient of Freud, and he told Freud, like, oh, it was weird. It was like, I had the feeling like I caused that with my thought, even though I know it was just a strange coincidence. And he called that the omnipotence of thoughts, the all-powerful nature of thoughts, the idea that thought can affect the world. Again, psychologists nowadays call this magical thinking. Freud called it, following this patient, the omnipotence of thought. But it can explain strange coincidences, and it ties into that animistic view of the universe. I don't know about Minority Report is when they're trying to prevent crimes before they happen, right? That's the one? I think that's Minority Report. I don't know. But yeah, manifesting and magic, it ties into that. That would be precognition. Yeah, that would be like a déjà vu precognition sort of thing. I would say precognition. But the omnipotence of thought is more like, yeah, like when people talk about manifesting something. Or it's exactly, the law of attraction. Exactly. That is magical thinking, the omnipotence of thought, right? The idea that you can put something out into the universe and then the universe will give it to you is kind of like what Freud is talking about here. perhaps I have to admit I am much less familiar with Jung than I am with Freud. So I'm not the right person to ask there. Oh, and strange repetition. I cannot not tell you this. This is why you've got to make sure you read Freud, because there's this one part where he's talking about how he was in this village, this little villa, this town square in Italy, and he's trying to leave because he says there are all these painted women. There are all these women in the windows with red silks, and they're all wearing rouge. I had to get the heck out of there. Yeah, you're right. Magic is like this. Yeah, magic with a K. Yes, not like stage magic, but like the ritual magic. So Freud is in this town square filled with these painted ladies, which is the Victorian Edwardian way of saying I was surrounded by sex workers. Freud had wandered into the red light district in this little village, this little town in Italy. And he's like, I've got to get the heck out of here. People are going to see me. They're going to recognize me. They're going to be like, Freud, what are you doing in the red light district? So Freud tries to leave, but he gets lost. And every time he ends up back in the square where he ended up, like trying to leave. And this happens like 3 or 4 more times before he finally finds his way out of the town square. And he's thinking to himself like, oh, do I have an unconscious repressed desire to perhaps use the services of one of these ladies? Maybe that's Freud's way. Freud's way of thinking, right? Yeah, exactly. Like Freud's like, oh no, what am I doing here again? Oh no, but like unconsciously, right? And it's interesting the way he describes the situation, because he does it in that Victorian Edwardian, very puritanical sort of like. The first time I read it, I didn't get it. He's like, oh, he's in this town square and the women are wearing makeup. What's the big deal? In Victorian times, women didn't typically wear makeup. If you wore makeup, they would say that you were of low character, that you were a prostitute or something like that, which is weird because just a century or so before that, women wore makeup all the time. And women, of course, wear makeup now. And men wore makeup back in the day, like in the, the 17th, 18th centuries. Men and women both wore makeup, especially if they were upper class. In the 19th century, it stopped. Then in the early 20th century, women start wearing makeup again. And now in the 21st century, a lot of men also wear it. And now that we recognize non-binary folks as a thing too, some of them also wear makeup. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird how it happens, how things change, isn't it? But, Freud, a man of his time, didn't want to be caught sneaking around the red light district, I suppose. So it's just funny the way he puts this in his essay. But how does Freud explain this sort of thing? I mean, maybe castration anxiety can explain why the Sandman is frightening, but why is the doppelganger frightening? Why is deja vu uncanny? What is it about strange coincidences or magical thinking that makes us feel the uncanny? This is why. Freud says, the analysis of cases of the uncanny has led us back to the old animistic view of the universe. A view characterized by the idea that the world was peopled with human spirits, by the narcissistic overrating of one's own mental processes, by the omnipotence of thoughts and the technique of magic that relied on it, by the attribution of carefully graded magical powers, or mana, to alien persons and things, and by all the inventions with which the unbounded narcissism of that period of development sought to defend itself against the unmistakable sanctions of reality. So really, what fundamentally explains the uncanny, unrepress those urges, Freud. Well, Freud used to say, people used to ask Freud, like, well, why are you always smoking that cigar? For this very reason. Like, Freud, you're all about sex. You've also always got a cigar in your mouth. What's that about? And Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, you know, clever Freud. Yeah, Freud was a lifelong smoker. He actually died as a result of jaw cancer because he smoked cigars all the time. Also did a lot of cocaine. Yeah. He stopped when he got older. But yeah, it was, you know, the late 19th century, early 20th century. None of this was prohibited. You could go to the pharmacy and you could buy opium, cocaine, literally anything. It was wild. Yeah. So you know, early Freud is like lots of cocaine. And he's writing like, oh, cocaine is so great, it makes me think clearer. And a few years later, he's like, you know what, guys, I think I'm going to stop doing cocaine. And he did, because it started to, you know, actually take a toll on his faculties. So you know, it's not the kind of thing you want to be doing if you want to be thinking clearly about stuff. So but what we have here is Freud basically kind of parroting the position that Jensch ends up in. Animism, animacy. That's what really causes our uncanny thing, our uncanny experiences. It's just that we repress these, or we surmount our animistic tendencies. Jensch seems to think that these are sort of just automatic responses that people have. Freud thinks that these are things that we used to do all the time, but that we now repress because we have science and we live in modern society where we understand that magical powers and stuff like that aren't really a thing, right? So Freud thinks it's a repressed or surmounted worldview. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how he did it, how he ingested it. It was probably injected. I want to say it was probably injected. But I don't know. I don't know that enough about Freud, or about cocaine for that matter. All I know is Freud was initially very, very excited about it, which was probably just the cocaine talking, if we're being honest. But yeah, he recognized that, like, oh, actually, you know what? Maybe not a good idea. Okay, let's not do all of the cocaine. So remember, Freud starts off kind of setting up a straw man of Jensch here. He says, on the whole, Jensch does not go beyond relating the uncanny to the novel and unfamiliar. For him, the essential condition for the emergence of a sense of the uncanny is intellectual uncertainty. One would suppose, then, that the uncanny would always be an area in which a person was unsure of his way around. The better oriented he was in the world around him, the less likely he would be to find the objects and occurrences in it uncanny. Fancy needles. Those syringes from the Victorian era were enormous, actually. I really would not have wanted to use a needle now or then. Because they were like enormous, just gross. So here is Jensch saying, well, or Freud saying, well, Jensch says the eliciting condition of the uncanny is uncertainty. So why don't we feel uncanniness whenever we're uncertain about anything at all? Well, this is not really a very charitable interpretation of Jensch, is it? Because Jensch says that, or rather, if you read Jensch, you see that uncertainty is a necessary condition for experiencing eeriness or uncanniness, but it's not a sufficient condition. You need uncertainty, but it's got to be uncertainty about particular things. The things in question, as I said earlier, were animacy and mentation. So yeah, Freud and Jensch end up pretty much at exactly the same place. Just that Freud says these animistic tendencies have been repressed or surmounted, where Jensch just thinks they're kind of running in the background. So let's read this bottom bit here. Yeah, here. Yeah. Oh, okay. I've already. Oh, never mind. I already read that part. We can skip this slide. Just compare that to Jensch. You know, Freud talking about the old animistic view of the universe. Compare that to Jensch. An important factor in the uncanny is the natural tendency of man to infer, in a kind of naive analogy with his own animate state, that things in the external world are also animate, or perhaps more correctly, are animate in the same way. It is all the more impossible to resist this psychical urge, the more primitive the individual's level of intellectual development is. So here he's talking about children, for example. Children are natural born animists, whereas adults kind of grow out of it, you know? Further, he says, it's not astonishing if that which man himself semi-consciously projected onto things from his own being now begins to terrify him in those very things, or that he is not always capable of exercising the spirits which were created out of his own head from that very head. This inability thus easily produces the feeling of being threatened by something unknown and incomprehensible that is just as enigmatic to the individual as his own psyche usually is as well. So, other than the psychoanalytic differences, I think these two end up really at a position, at these two positions that bear a sort of uncanny similarity to one another, really. And now we can come back to corpses. Why are corpses eerie? Why are robots eerie? Are robots eerie because they remind us of corpses? No, I do not think so. I think the reason why corpses are eerie is the same reason why robots are eerie, just flipped. Robots can seem eerie because we know, we hold beliefs about robots. We know things about them. So if I encounter a robot or an automaton, I know that it is an inanimate object. But that's not what I perceive. What I perceive is something that behaves as if it's an animate object, as if it's alive. And I also perceive, depending on the way it's behaving, that it might even have a mind and have thoughts. And this sort of dissonance between what I believe and what I perceive, I think, creates this sense of eeriness. Why are corpses eerie? For the converse reasons. If you're at an open casket funeral, for example, and you see the body of a relative, it's going to seem a little uncanny because you are so used to seeing that person alive. Indeed, you still see that person as a member of the category of things that are alive, a human being. Human beings are things that live. But here they are before you deceased, inanimate, with no thoughts in their head and no behaviors, nothing at all. That is also weird. So it's a dissonance between what we know and what we perceive, not some association with corpses. By the way, when you experience disgust, you know it's disgust, right? You know it's disgust. Disgust feels very different, phenomenologically speaking, than feeling a sense of eeriness does. Yeah, where did they go? Yeah, when you look at a corpse, say an open casket funeral, it almost looks like they could just open their eyes and wake up from a sleep. Right? That's not a disgust response. That's not a disgust response at all. I mean, a disgust response, you're retching, you're gagging, you're averting your eyes. Your stomach is turning. Yes, Tabitha, I would hypothesize that they do. I would say that they engage different brain areas. And this is something that I'd really like to be able to test in the near future. Someone's probably already done it, but it never hurts to replicate. So who knows? Maybe in the near future, I can get into a lab and see if we can get to the bottom of this. I know that disgust tends to engage the older parts of the brain, as you said earlier, like the limbic system. I think the amygdala, is very active. The amygdala is involved when in the processing of a lot of negative emotions. So anger, disgust, fright. You're going to see activity in the amygdala. And psychopaths who have smaller volumes in their amygdala, not only do they feel less fear and anxiety, they have lower disgust response. So that's why surgeons, for example, tend to have higher psychopathy scores. It doesn't mean that your surgeon is a psychopath, but what it means is they're more psychopathic to the extent that they're not nervous cutting open a living body and they're not grossed out by all the blood and guts and everything, right? So you probably want a psychopath, a little bit of a psychopath for your surgeon. A little bit, not full blown, but a little bit. Right? It's true, because imagine you had some sort of super empathic hippie as your surgeon. Now they have to cut you open, but you know, oh, I don't want to hurt them, and oh, there's blood. You know, like it. You don't want that. You want a little psychopathic. I haven't seen that. I know about Firefly, but I haven't seen it. It sounds like something similar they did in a show called The Expanse. They messed with this guy's temporal parietal junction and basically removed his empathy, and he becomes a psychopath. And then they can get him to do all this research, all this unethical research, and he doesn't care because he has no empathy anymore, because they just turn that part of the brain off, right? I guess I wonder, did something similar happen in Firefly with this character? I'll just have to go watch the show, I suppose. Saw the first couple episodes of Firefly, but I didn't really stick with it way back in the day. I should probably give it another try. It's just, I don't know, Joss Whedon's directing style has always just, there's something about it. I can't put my finger on it, but there's just something about it that kind of, I could never get into it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. I think that eeriness, chat. What's going on in the chat? Oh, okay. There's a psychopathic element too. Okay, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what is eeriness? Here's what I think. Eeriness is an emotion. Cool. What are the emotions, you say? Well, emotions do a lot of things. Emotions are affective states, which means they feel their feelings. They're episodic in nature, so they don't last forever. They occur during episodes, and they occur in response to important things. They let us know what is important in our environment or in our social lives or in anything like that. Inside Out Corpses. Ooh, okay. Maybe I'll have to give it a watch. Sounds pretty gross. So emotions indicate when important things are happening to you. Think about it. Maybe you see a big, giant, scary dog when you're out for a walk, and it breaks off of its lead and it runs at you, barking viciously, teeth bared, salivating. You're going to feel frightened. Well, that fright is telling you that, hey, that dog could be dangerous. You better get out of here. Emotions have phenomenology, intentionality, and epistemology. Emotions have phenomenology. That means that there's something that it's like to have an emotion. Emotions have intentionality, which means they're about something. They have content. And emotions have epistemology. They have truth and justification conditions. So yes, you can be wrong about your emotions in the sense that you can feel an emotion that you ought not to feel. There's a trend I find a little bit worrying on social media where everybody's feelings are valid all the time. And yeah, your feelings are valid. Like, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. But the problem is sometimes our emotions don't work properly. In the case of anxiety disorders and things like that, for example. And it's important to know when your emotions are going wrong because it could be maladaptive for you. So yeah, if you're feeling a certain kind of way, you shouldn't tell that person like, hey, stop feeling sorry for yourself, right? No, don't do that. Their feelings are valid in that sense. But there are also cases where you ought not to feel the emotion you're feeling because it's bad for you. So, for example, maybe that dog that's running towards you, you think it's going to attack you and bite you, but it jumps up on you, knocks you over, and then just licks your face and gives you all of the pupper kisses. Well, in that case, your fear would have been incorrect and unjustified, right? But now that you know, the next time you see that dog, you know you don't have to be frightened anymore. So emotions also have what we call valence. They can be positive or negative. They can feel good or feel bad. Emotions are often also accompanied by judgments like, scary dog. I bet that dog's going to attack me. It's dangerous. I better leave. Judgments. Of course, bodily changes, right? Emotions come with their own sets of facial expressions and bodily postures. Our respiration rate, heart rate, skin conductance, hormone levels all change depending on what emotion we're feeling. Now, some theorists think that emotions are more cognitive, more like judgments, and others think that emotions are more like perceptions. That difference does not really matter here. And after all, no theory of emotion is complete. But most theories of emotion agree that emotions represent important relations between the organism and the environment. So, for example, fear represents danger. It gets you ready to fight or to run away. Sadness represents a loss that you've suffered. Anger is what you feel when an injustice has happened to you, and it might cause you to retaliate to try and make things right. When you get angry on someone else's behalf, by the way, that's called indignation. Happiness means something good has happened to you. Maybe you've accomplished something, or you received a nice gift or something. Happiness, something good. What about eeriness? I say, and this is me, this is not Jentsch, this is not Freud, this is not anyone else. I say that eeriness is a type of fear or fright, but it's not fright like, I'm frightened. It's fright in the sense that it's a type of anxiety. Now, anxiety, according to the emotion theorist Richard Lazarus, is a type of fear whose intentionality is uncertainty. So most emotions are about things, right? Fear is about danger, the scary dog or the bear. Sadness is about the loss, maybe the relative who passed away, right? Anger represents an injustice. Anger could be about how somebody cut in front of you in the line the other day and how you became angry and wanted to retaliate, but you didn't because you're chill. So eeriness is anxiety is about uncertainty itself. Think about it when you have performance anxiety because you don't know how things are going to go. Or if you're anxious about a particular situation, it's probably because you don't know what to expect in that situation. So you're kind of hovering on the verge of that fight or flight response. And that's what anxiety is. I think eeriness is a kind of anxiety. And it's about uncertainty, about whether animate beings may in fact be inanimate, or whether inanimate beings may in fact be animate, and whether these beings may have a mind or not. Like Jentsch said, when it appears like these inanimate objects which move as if they're alive are united with certain bodily and mental functions, they're even more creepy. And the particular phenomenology of eeriness, what it's like to feel a sense of eeriness, I think can be explained ultimately by the phenomenology of what it's like to experience, to interact with people. And then that kind of gets corrupted by all this misperceived that's going on. Jentsch concludes thusly. He writes, the human desire for intellectual mastery of one's environment is a strong one. Intellectual uncertainty provides psychical shelter in the struggle for existence. However it came to be, it signifies a defensive position against the assault of hostile forces, and the lack of such certainty is equivalent to a lack of cover in the episodes of that never-ending war of the human and the organic world, for the sake of which the strongest and most impregnable bastions of science were erected. It's not nice to be uncertain. It sucks. What's that line from like every Christopher Nolan movie? I swear it's in all of them. People fear what they don't understand. And that's kind of what Yench is saying here, right? People fear what they don't understand. See, Batman, Uncanny, is the most uncanny superhero. So what Yench is saying at the end there is like, look, we don't like being uncertain. That's why we do science. But every once in a while, that uncertainty creeps back in. And that is the uncanny. Uncertainty about animacy and mentation. Why does it make us feel the way we do? A lot of reasons, but a lot of it's to do with survival, right? Imagine back in the day living in a hunter-gatherer society, looking at the world in this way. The world would seem to be very alive, gods and spirits everywhere. It would be like living in a kind of like a magical world if you didn't understand it the way we do today, if you think about it. Yeah. I mean, when you talk to people who believe in magic, well, our ancestors really knew what it would have been like to believe in magic because they didn't have science, right? Imagine looking at the world that way. It's difficult for me to put myself in their shoes, in our ancestors' shoes, because we do have science, and like I'm trained as a scientist, so it's hard to think my way out of this. But every once in a while, something anomalous happens that perhaps makes it like what it was like to be our ancient ancestors. That's the uncanny. And this sensation, I argue, is the same as what happens when we encounter anomalous or paranormal phenomena. Yeah, there are, Alicia, absolutely. There are many and hunter-gatherer societies that live the way our ancestors were living pre-agricultural revolution, and they would still oh, nice, awesome. Yeah, so maybe you could like try and find out more about how they look at the world. That would be really awesome. Make some contributions and bring some knowledge from these folks to the scientific community. That would be amazing. But yeah, those people that still live this way, imagine, it's hard to put ourselves in their shoes, but I think we can when we have these anomalous experiences. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Oh, sweet. Well, maybe we could do a zombie lecture too. That could be one of the topics we talk about. Yeah, because zombies come to Haiti via Africa, and from Haiti to the southern United States, if I'm not mistaken, along with many other things like voodoo, Santeria, stuff like that. I really hope we can get the dark tourism lecture to happen because Hilary Becker, the professor that I was talking with, has been to Louisiana, and he's been to a lot of these sites where there's like he's talked to the voodoo queen and all those folks down there. Like it's really cool stuff. So I really hope that happens, but a zombie lecture would also be cool. It's interesting how we science up the zombies nowadays. Like original zombies from Haitian folklore are a supernatural phenomenon, but now we've got like The Last of Us, where it's a fungus that makes you a zombie, and it's science, it's taken out of its supernatural context and naturalized. kind of like how I've naturalized the uncanny. But then are they really zombies anymore? Not really. But then again, I don't want to straw man the show. They don't call them zombies on The Last of Us or in the video game. They call them the infected, right? So, but they're zombies. They're totally zombies. Yeah, 9 to 5. There's too many zombies. Can we get back to robots? Because I like those. I like those better than zombies. First reading response. So, okay, yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What you need to do for the reading response is choose an interesting idea that's related to the themes of the course. Anything that interests you, anything to do with the paranormal, and you have to critically examine it, critically assess it. So in about, I forget the word limit, I think it's 500 to 750 words, excluding references. What you need to do is introduce and explain the idea, and then you need to critique it. So you could do something like, who's right about the uncanny, Jensch or Freud? Briefly explain what the uncanny is, briefly explain what Freud thinks it is, what Jensch thinks it is, and then explain who you think is correct and why you think that. So it's very simple. It's just critique. It's just summarize the idea, say what you agree with and disagree with, and why. Think of it like a dialectic. Think of it like they say, I say. And it really is that simple. It really is that simple. That's all I want. 500 to 750 words. Make sure you cite sources properly. Use APA format. Use the template that I've created on Brightspace. And use the link to Purdue University's online writing lab, which is also on Brightspace, so that you can make sure that you're citing things correctly. But that's basically it. How do I mark it? Well, what I'm looking for is nice, clean writing. I probably push the due date back, so don't worry about that. How I evaluate this is I'm looking for clarity. Your writing needs to be clear, free of spelling and grammar mistakes. Key terms need to be clearly explained and correctly explained. And you want to watch out for like errors of reasoning. I mean, really, I don't really, like, a lot of people ask me for a rubric. I don't find rubrics helpful. I apologize if a lot of you do, but I just don't. I just know a good paper from a bad one after doing this for a while. If your paper is free of errors, spelling errors, factual errors, errors of reasoning, you're probably going to be in the A range. A few little errors here and there, B range. Substantial errors, C range. If everything is just going wrong, D range or below is really what we're talking about here. Whatever reading you want. I think we, yeah, if you really seriously think about it and you write, you just do your best. Everybody do your best. I don't go as hard on the first one as I do the second one, because I realize not all of you have written something like this before. And I do try to make my criticism very constructive. So the first critical response I tend to be a bit easier on, and I'm easier on both responses than I am on the final paper, because by the final paper, you should be like really awesome at writing something. Sydney, you've had your hand up there for a bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, so 2 questions. So one, we can write about anything that was discussed in the readings in class. Is that correct?
Yep. Or anything that we haven't discussed, but which is still related to the themes of the class. Okay. So if you want to connect something from outside of class, like we did today with Jordan Peele, like, are Jordan Peele's films uncanny? Why or why not?
Okay.
You could use Jensch and Freud to show why they are, right?
The second question would be, would I be able to expand on that conversation we had regarding in that story about the robot woman being like more attractive than the real woman?
Yes, but cite the lecture, and if you can, cite the student in the lecture.
I think it was me.
Oh, it was you. Okay, it was you.
Me.
It was you. Okay, so if it was your thing, then just say, so in this lecture, this came up, and just cite the lecture.
Okay.
because you do have to cite yourself, even if it's,
Yes.
you can still technically plagiarize yourself. So
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And what do we have over here? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what this is like. It's like, you know what? Like, just go out and do it. That's how you learn. University sometimes is a little too theoretical. We're just sitting and taking notes, and people feel like they're learning a lot, and then they have to write a critical response, and it's like, oh my God, what do I do? Well, just write, think and write. It's okay. You guys have got this, right? You're second year students now. You can do this totally. You'll be okay. So that's the reading response. And yeah, I probably will push the due date back a little bit, and I need to find out if I've got a TA in this class. I really hope I do. Otherwise, I'm going to have a lot of these things to be grading. Yeah, but that's why they teach high school. Sorry, no tea, no shade, but yeah. I was wrong about university. I was wrong when I was at that age. Yeah. When I was at that age, I thought I could never go to university. I didn't do that well in school. I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't like a bad student. I wasn't like rebellious and acting up. If anything, I was too good. Yeah, university can be this way. I'm not saying that it's not universally, but in high school, I think I probably would have dropped out if it weren't for the music program that I was in. It just was not. I mean, what's that line from Rick and Morty? It's not a place for smart people. Like, I really resonate with that. And just like thinking I'd never go to university because university was just more of that. So I went to college and hated it. And then I went to university. And it turned out I was really good at university. I was actually like really, really good at university. And I graduated philosophy, did the undergrad, top of the class, went to Carleton, did the master's degree, and I thought, okay, I'm still good at this. It's a little more challenging, but I'm still good at this. And then did the PhD, and I thought, well, this is hard, but still pretty good at it. So university it doesn't have to be impossible. It's just it's not for everybody, and not every class or every area is for everybody. But I try not to make my learning materials overly challenging. I want you to get excited about what you're learning about. I don't want you to have to dread the assignments that you need to do. You're just not going to learn anything that way. So anyway, so here what I've done is I've tried to build a naturalistic account of the uncanny. I think it can inform research on the uncanny valley phenomenon. I think it could maybe be used in some of that humanities research on the uncanny, and perhaps it could even be helpful to anomalistic psychologists for explaining the affective responses that we show toward anomalous events, persons, scenarios, so on and so forth. Tried to adjudicate between Jensch and Freud. And I think that while each of these thinkers has some surface level disagreements, they kind of end up in the same place at the end, which is interesting. And I've also tried to sketch out what I think eeriness is as an emotion. Eeriness is the emotion we feel when we are confronted with something uncanny or perhaps anomalous or paranormal. And eeriness is a type of anxiety, the content of which is always uncertainty about animacy or mentation, or both. That's it, I think, for today. Yep, that's all. That's all I have. And kind of, philosophy is considered part of the humanities. Yep, for sure. But we're not in the humanities department, right? Because there's like the humanities, like Age of Enlightenment humanities, which is like stuff humans do, art, literature, law, philosophy. But then nowadays there are like humanities departments. And we're this class is being taught out of the philosophy department. So technically we're in a philosophy class, but philosophy does belong to the humanities. But humanities also includes all of that other stuff like literature, architectural studies, queer theory, law, legal studies. It's all part of the humanities, right? So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Isaac. Well, that is it. And I believe it is just about time for us to stop. So thanks, everybody. That was really great. I had a good lecture. I hope you all enjoyed this one. I will probably make an announcement about the exact due date for your first reading response shortly. I'd say stay tuned for that for Monday or Tuesday. I definitely will push it back, but stay tuned for an announcement Monday, Tuesday at the latest. If you have any questions about the material, let me know. Next week, we will do the stuff from Susan Blackmore's book. So ESP and PK and mediumship and ghost hunting. So please read those readings. It's a lot less reading intensive next week. So please do them. And please do go back and read the stuff for today, because, you know, I can tell you all of this, but it's not really going to stick unless you read the readings and connect with the readings. So otherwise, thanks, everybody. I will see you all next week. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.